Tell us a little bit about your background, Alan, as far as what what you're working on right now. And I know obviously Battle Pug is a cool one. You've done a lot of DC stuff, but talk about, some of your current stuff.
Well, I'm currently working on Godzilla with Drew, who's just on, and this is actually a double page spread. You can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. It was a double page spread from the last book I colored with him, and now we're working on the next one. So this is Drew's art. I'm doing a web comic right now that's been a lot of fun. It's for Webtoons, but it's not announced yet, so I can't really talk about that, of course. And then I'm working on a DC Black Label book called The Last Gods, or The Last God. I got one over here somewhere, and I'm helping out color on that. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of everything. Still doing covers for DC. Do a lot of little random pinup. If people have things drawn, they send things my way, and I do a digital coloring version of them. So this is, I was going to just show you some examples of some different things I've done. This is, I do a lot of things for DC when they do the collected editions, where they want the original art colored in a modern style. So this is for the Amethyst DC showcase. This is for the Hawk and Dove one. This is actually, it's probably the only Liefeld thing I've ever colored. This was actually for a variant cover for that last Godzilla book, and it was drawn by Art Adams. And actually, I have a high-res version of that. I was going to kind of pull apart and show you kind of what I do. This is, of course, for some Green Lantern and Green Arrow stuff. And this was for Earth 2 book. It was kind of before it was before Rebirth. So this was that series that kind of led into Rebirth for DC Comics. And some more Batman stuff. Some more Batman stuff. I just basically opened a bunch of JPEGs just to show kind of what I've been doing. I got to recolor all these Kelly covers for the Knight's Fall for Batman, which was really fun because that's kind of when I started buying comics. So it was something that was really, that was like, those were the issues I was buying at Bonanza Books and Comics at the time in Modesto. So it was really cool to go back and work with the original line art and just kind of, get to put my take on it. Of course, this is the famous Bane piece. Let's see. And then something I did not long ago was the Dark Universe with DC Comics. It was a kind of like it's a alternative universe or different multiverse where the Black Lanterns won. So I'm trying to remember the artist's name on this. Of course, I'm totally blanking. It was a really fun book. I mean, everybody's a Black Lantern basically at this point, and the only people that are alive are like Dove and Mr. Miracle and Lobo. So it was like a Lobo book, Lobo books can be pretty gruesome, but also a lot of fun. And then of course, Battle Pug, which we just kind of wrapped up the first little mini for Image Comics, and Mike Norton's the artist and writer on. This is from the webcomic that we did. So, so if it's okay, I'm just going to kind of open up a raw page and show you pretty much what I do.
That would be great, and we're monitoring the chat area, and we'll give you any questions or comments that people throw out.
Great. This is from Batgirl, Birds of Prey, and it just happens to be with Dick Grayson's Nightwing page. But this is what I got as a black and white page The artist is Rogue Antonio, and the writers were the Benson sisters, who are awesome. Um, and just like, when I usually get a bunch of, I usually get a script and then a batch of black and white pages that I start with. There was a time in the past where I'd get like the whole book at once, and then they're like, oh yeah, okay, it's due in 2 weeks. But now it's more like, here's 5 pages, it's due in 2 weeks. We'll get you the rest of the 15 sometime over the next 2 weeks before it's actually due. So, because there's a pretty short lead time anymore. So what I do with this is I get these black and white pages, and I either flat them or I have them flatted. And what that means is I actually go through these, we go through and break this up by actually redrawing basically the entire comic or the entire page in shapes and giving those flat colors. I don't have what that looked like exactly. These are the grayscale version of my flat. So basically that gives me the ability to wand selectable areas. And then I go through, let's turn off all these layers. This has a lot of layers. And I actually do the rendering to simulate light sources. So this is what my page looked like before I add all the special effects in it. Where I go through, and this was a fun book. I got to do something a little different than I normally do, and that's I used hard cuts to make these shapes, where a lot of times I'm doing a lot more gradiated fills and kind of a softer 3D rendering, where in this case I did these really hard lines. So if you look at this, after I've gone through, I do a lot of texture, use a lot of texture for things like the streets, and a little bit, you can see a little bit of gradation there where I use like airbrushes and so forth. But after I do all that base rendering and I know where my light sources are, I start doing things like, adding lights to skyscrapers. Looks like I kind of knocked that out. Let's leave that off. Added in a sky, which is a bunch of texture. But that alone wasn't enough. So then I added some stars, then some clouds. And this was basically a picture of a cloud that I took. And then I added that in using a different kind of mode. That's a normal mode. See, I added some glows in the clouds. Threw a little rim light on Nightwing's right side there. And this is the actual line art sitting on top of everything. And then stuff like headlights, some more glows. I always love this in animation where they do that, the squiggly brake lights, even though he's going full speed. So it's taillights, I guess. So that's a really simple breakdown of what I'm doing without any of all the work involved.
Alan, how long does it take you to do something like that?
That page probably took me about 2 to 3 hours. In something like this, this Art Adams piece, you can see I had all these layers, and I don't have a lot of them on. It's because in reality, something like this probably took me longer because I did a lot of experimentation to make it look right. Because you've got a good half of the page is just going to be this energy beam from Godzilla. So I think I probably did this in about an hour, actually. But there's lots of things like texture, and I'm trying to highlight different areas in the energy to really get it to the right kind of glow. Plus, it's going to be on the shelf facing the buyer, so it's something that you want to, like, if you're walking down a comic book row, you want something that pops out. So that's definitely something that I would consider for something like a cover. What I was going to show you though is, here's a Battle Pug page. And this is kind of what I was talking about before, where I would get a a black and white image like this. And this is a web comic, or so it's kind of it's a different format. And I'd go through and do the flatting. My flats would look like this in the end. So it's pretty much how I color is I start with the shadows and then lighten from there. So I tend to try not to darken things, because the more pigment you put down on a page, the darker it gets, whether you can see it on your screen or not. Because the thing about what colors have to think about is that when you're working with things digitally on your screen, all those colors are made by adding light to it. But when it's being printed, you're putting pigment down on paper. So you're making something darker. And so there's a conversion between RGB and pigment when when it goes to print. Like computers make that adjustment, but it's not exactly perfect. So it's something you have to be aware of, because you can make something that looks beautiful on your screen, and it just will never print. There's colors like green. Like whenever I do a Green Lantern page, there's once in a while I have to cross my fingers and just like, I think this is going to work. Luckily, I've been doing this for like 15 years. So I've got a pretty good idea of what's going to work and what's not going to work. Let's see here. So stuff like this, we've got this warrior here and this sun, and I'm, Mike had this great concept for Battle Pug where, it's like a kind of a Conan-esque figure. And I always loved those like 70s and 80s like paintings of Conan and barbarians, and I love those motifs, the color motifs. So I try to keep those going through, but my own sensibility always kind of would would overwhelm it from time to time. Let's see what's going on here. So now I'm using a computer that I don't normally use. So if I have some hiccups, that might be the case. This is actually the computer. I teach in a master's in comics program at CCA in San Francisco. That's California College of Art. And they actually offer a master's degree in comics, which is really cool. And I teach digital tools for that class. So I actually, let's see. I teach basically not only how my style of coloring or how to color, but things that matter, like making sure that your stuff is going to print, and file formats and things like that. Well, that's a little funky. I'm also using a different Wacom tablet I normally do. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a selection, and I'm going to use the gradient tool, and this is called cut and grad. We're basically drawing selections and then gradiating like a screen tone over the top to give it that sense of 3D feel. Let's see. And this is kind of, like the cool thing about stuff like this is it's got kind of like a kind of a cartoony feel to it. So it doesn't have to be like perfect when it comes to anatomy. It just has to look cool, and it has to like make sense visually. So a lot of it is basically just figuring out the light sources and then making it consistent all the way through. So, I've kind of given him this rim light. And oops, I hit the wrong key. Let's see.
Alan, Jared in our comments asked, what is your favorite comic?
Oh, you remember that part in Scott Pilgrim when they ask him like what's his favorite game? Um, that's pretty hard. Um, like I grew up reading a lot of X-Men and Batman, and I still have those comics. I've moved quite a few times in my life, so like I guess the ones I still have are my favorites. A lot of the Wildstorm stuff. My first job in comics was actually at Wildstorm, the studio, in 1997, which was really cool. Jim Lee was my boss, and I was working in the production department. So my job was to scan in all the original boards, all the original art. And at the time, DC had just bought Wildstorm, so I was scanning in a lot of DC comic stuff, and they still had the letters on the board, so I could read them as I scanned every page. It was during the whole fall of Gotham, or when they had the big earthquake and the plague, and the United States decided that Gotham wasn't part of the United States anymore. So I hope that answers that question. So here we have. I've worked on just about every DC character or almost all their comics too. I've colored everything from JLA, JSA, Freedom Force, let's see, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. There's not much I haven't done on the DC end. I haven't done much Marvel work though, and that's not because I don't want to. It was hard. It's been harder for me to break in at Marvel for some reason. I've actually done a lot of work with people that exhibit at StocktonCon, like Ethan Beaver and Drew and Chris Moreno. I got to color some on the history of wrestling book with him and written by Aubrey Sitterson.
Yeah, that's a really fun book.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've done a lot of work with Dennis Culver, but he's writing the book or the thing I can't talk about yet because it's not announced, of course. But it's really fun because it's very different from what I normally do. Are you curious about any particular characters or books or anything?
We just love to see you kind of work, and it's great to kind of see really some of the great stuff that you've done. I mean, I loved when you were kind of going through each of the different pieces from DC, and then also the Godzilla, so that there's some really fun stuff in here.
Yeah, I've worked on so many things. It's kind of crazy. Like there's some Batman drawn by I'm blanking on her name as well. She's from Australia, artist. It's totally. I remember all the names when I'm at comic book conventions, but I haven't been in like hanging out with comic book people in a while. So like that part of my brain just isn't working anymore.
Is that Nicola Scott?
Yes, Nicola Scott. This is her stuff. This is a really fun thing. I always kind of think of Batman as a noir character. That's some of my favorite coloring was when it's treated as that dark detective. And this was like the first time I ever tried to do this. Where I wanted like the blinds, the light coming through the blinds, and I totally remember like trying to perfect these effects to get them just the right way where Batman is coming through. Let's see, some more Nicola Scott. Thanks for the quick Google search, Mike.
You got it.
Here's some Dial H for Hero. This was actually some pretty cool stuff. Let's see. This is George Perez. um, DC, not limited. DC, it's kind of a retelling of the Crisis in like splash pages. So they have all these crazy scenes, you know, they're just like splash little, like one big page of things that happened during Crisis. So I get to color just about everybody during that time. I mean, there's the Blue Devil. Um, it's just, it's kind of insane. Um, really fun book to work on. The cover for this was truly insane. If I have that cover right here, you can see these are all books that I've worked on. So they are, I've got quite a few things. Oh, DC Legacies, there it is. Let's see, I think this might be the Walt, this is the Keith Griffith one? That's Keith Griffith. I've done a lot, oh, there's George Perez, I saw the name. There we go. So this page, this cover was like where two covers were scanned and put together. But I got the first side, and then about a month later, I got the second side. And you can see, like, and then, you know, George Perez drew it, and he designed a lot of these costumes. So, like, I did a once over. Let's do the color version. And then, like, I got my, like, page of notes because, like, I just chose, you know, like, I had to look up all the different characters online to try to find, like, the 80s versions of their costumes. And then, you know, some of these, like, especially, like, the Legionnaires, or the Legionnaires, like, they had 3 different costumes that year. So, of course, I didn't get everything right. But when I got this, it was basically split right down the middle in here. And my editor at the time was Mike Carlin, who was a great editor. He was the editor when, like, The Death of Superman, and he kind of ran DC before that at some point. And he became an editor, went back to becoming an editor. And he's like, you know what, the best way to do this is just give it a red light source. And that way you don't have to kill yourself doing all these things. But the thing that takes the longest for something like this is you can see that, if you can see, like, the original line art, it's fairly flat, even though it's very dynamic, but the line, because the backgrounds are black and the characters have black lines, I actually went through and knocked out all those backgrounds to really make the characters pop from the background. You can see that here in this file, where I actually had to go in and make this selection and give that light source to make those characters really pop from the background. So it was fun. It's a really fun one. I think I also did a Walt Simonson cover. Let's see where that one is. Variant. Walt was a really cool person to work with. I remember the first time I did a cover, or I did a Hawkman story for him. And he was like the first, here's a Walt Simonson cover for that. He was the first creator that ever just called me, or artist that called me. And I was scared because, you know, most of the time I just work via email. And like, oh, and Mike was the editor on this, and he's like, Walt's gonna call you. He's a really nice person. And he was. I mean, he actually called me, and I was out at a bar with some friends, and I went outside, and after about an hour on the phone, I'm like, well, I really don't want to get off the phone with you, but I kind of have to because I have friends that are waiting for me. But I remember he called, left a message, and I called back, and I didn't realize Louise Simonson was his wife. Mm-hmm. And she answered the phone, and she's like, well, I'm on the phone right now. I'll tell Walt to call you back. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't realize who I was talking to at the time. And otherwise, I probably would have tried to, you know, strike up a conversation. Because I'm a fan of New Mutants and everything that she's done.
Great. We're about out of time here, Alan. But before you go, talk a little bit about what you're working on currently and what people can look for in the store soon.
Well, the book that I'm actually doing the most on right now is I'm going to turn off screen share here. I'll turn that off. Stop. All right. Can you see me?
We can. That looks very cool. Alan, you just went muted.
I think I've got that set up permanently because there's always noise in the background.
Gotcha.
And then I've got a Webtoons comic that I'm coloring. That's the one I'm not. It hasn't been announced, but the artist is Yuki Seikai, and it's an anime-looking thing, and it looks really cool. Written by Dennis Culver. It's a soft announcement because I'm not going to say the name of what it is, but it'll be coming out soon. And then I'm trying to think what else. And then of course Godzilla with Drew, and for Legendary. I'm getting those pages all the time. They're beautiful, and I'm really looking forward to it. I was really happy how the last one came out. I kind of came in the last half of that book and kind of reworked most of it, and I think it turned out really cool, and it's really cool to work with a studio like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Alan. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we hopefully will see you at a convention sometime soon.
Great.
All right.
And I'm looking forward to seeing people in person again.
All right. Alan Passalaqua joining us here